morning. Anyone here? I had one sort of question in the Discord server, which right now 2 people, asking about, let me actually pull it up. Asking about my experience masking as a person without ADHD. And my answer to that, I have a video that I've tried to record a couple times. Basically, like, I haven't really understood it as masking. I've just understood it as I'm very weird and I'm supposed to be more normal. And I think part of the issue I've realized I've had has been the people who have been aggressively telling me I need to be more normal are themselves not necessarily normal people, or they're people who are aggressive about that are not necessarily normal. As you can see, I have Zuli. The poll was slightly more in favor of wanting Leela, but as I said, don't have Zuli in a lot of videos because bad mood. I have a ring light here. I don't know. Is that bothering you? Hello. Hi, Rodney. Yeah, love you to the bird. And so Leela is relatively easy to film with, whereas Zuli likes chewing on my shirt, which is why I have the towel here. Oh dear. And she does not like this setup. What's the matter? I guess the setup is a little bit different because I'm not paying attention to you. And then also she can be vocal. Yeah, I love you, Zuli. So if anyone has questions, as I said earlier, started the stream, one person sort of asked about my experience masking with autism and ADHD, and I again didn't even realize I had ADHD. It was even a possibility until my early 30s, even though I was taking ADHD meds off-label as a treatment for anxiety with autism. And then autism, I just had the idea I need to try to be more normal. Yeah, you're super cute. And you can see if I'm not getting questions, Zuli is also willing to contribute. Yeah. She is in a bad mood, so good morning, Daniel. Yeah, you are. Yeah, you are. You could, even without the nipping at my ear twice, you can see her head feathers are raised, which is a sign of agitation, which, hello, SMY Yellow Dog. I don't know if is it the ring light that's bothering you? I got a ring light after my interview with Zarina. How does it look if I turn the ring light off? Does that make things better? We'll see. Today I actually have good lighting. Anyone have any questions? Oh, cool. What did you study? My father went to UMass for his computer science PhD. I don't think I've mentioned. Yeah. Feeling better without the ring light? Oh yeah, UMass is, like, my impression was talking to people, like the 5 big things UMass was good for were the hospitality management, polymer science, agriculture, linguistics, and computer science. Yeah, I would love to have Zuli in more videos. Zuli is the only bird I've had since she was a baby. So, of course, she's my favorite. And since I don't see my pets as kids, I don't have to pretend I'm not playing favorites. But she is talkative, which you can probably hear her babbling a little bit. And she likes chewing on my shirt. She also likes squawking. I have to edit it out. Oh, so Quakerism. So Quakerism is a religious denomination that arose out of the English Radical Reformation. And there are really only two surviving. There are a bunch of denominations that sort of came out of there, and there are only two that are around anymore. One is Quakerism, one is Baptists. One is the Baptists. And the Baptists will sometimes argue that they are earlier, but historians generally agree they came out of that. And so the Quakers were there was the English Civil War, and the Quakers, who were mostly in sort of northern England, said, we're not going to be involved in these conflicts. And they started meeting separately and sitting in silence until the Holy Spirit moved them. And there were sort of three big leaders, but the one everyone remembers is George Fox. And then, and Quakers were always, and I don't know if any of you watch Redeem Zoomer, but one of his big things about, he defines Protestantism as not doing voluntary schism, which Quakers obviously did. And Quakers were considered more heretical-ish by the other sort of Protestant denominations, often on the level of like Catholics. And then in the US, and in North America generally, we had a schism between so Quakerism had this sort of independent tradition of unprogrammed worship that was very different from traditional Christian worship. We were non-creedal. And someday we had this schism around I think it was the Second Great Awakening. It was around the time that Mormonism came about as well, where the followers of Elias Hicks were basically like, we want to be Quaker first, and sort of redoubled down on Quakerism, while the so-called Orthodox friends were like, no, we want to be Christian first and refocus on Christianity. And then both groups had other schisms. The Hicksite friends reunited. The Orthodox friends did not. So there's a small group of conservative friends who are both, they practice unprogrammed worship and they are explicitly Christian. And then you have the pastoral friends who, to varying degrees, are more conventionally Christian. And then my branch of Quakerism has sort of removed itself from, you don't necessarily have to be Christian to be Quaker. Although now there's sort of, you're seeing people in Quakerism who are taking the attitude, you don't even need to be Quaker to be Quaker, which I have issues with. But yeah, so sorry, I don't know if that made sense, but that's basically my summary of Quakerism. Next question. Oh, so reading autobiography to learn social skills. Yeah, there are similarities between Quakerism and Sufism, and actually, I don't know if anyone here is familiar with Alevism. About 15 to 20% of people in Turkey are Alevis, which is a heterodox Shia sect. And it's hard to find a lot of information about it. But from what I can find, I see a lot of similarities to Quakerism, although one big difference is because of the persecution. The Alevis are very secretive. And I'm realizing I only met one person who was openly Alevi, and he was an atheist. It was sort of like a lot of Alevis in Turkey. It's sort of like Jews, where they will be like, you can be an atheist Jew. But I've realized, like, because about a sixth of Turks are Alevis, and I've realized looking back, there are a lot of people I met who were probably Alevis, but if you're not in the group, you don't recognize, whereas Quakers, we've always been a much smaller portion of the population, but also much more open about, you can just walk into Quaker meeting. Anyways, sorry. So the next question I was trying to answer was autobiography for people with autism to learn social skills. I feel like, for me, learning social skills has been, and something I've realized, and I read a post about this, I don't know if you guys know about the double empathy problem of autistic people have a hard time, or neurodivergent people, understanding neurotypical people, and they have a hard time understanding us, but they're not expected to. And I've realized, like, I used to say that I thought it was, so if you know System 1, System 2 thinking, Daniel Kahneman, System 1 is automatic, instinctive, System 2 is slow, deliberate. And I was like, I had to use System 2 thinking for social skills problems. And then I realized that's not actually true for neurodivergent people. And in fact, I think to be better because I'm talking to other neurodivergent people. We're both used to trying to accommodate neurotypical people. And so there's more grace and understanding compared to neurotypical people. And I'll often see neurotypical people being like, I don't get this other neurotypical person. I'm like, I do, because I've had to try to understand that better. But anyways, to the extent that my social skills have gotten better, like they would try to teach me stuff and it wasn't helpful because they were making, I think, basically false assumptions about why I struggle with social skills, which it wasn't. Again, I don't think it was an inability to do the cognitive, like, theory of mind modeling so much as it was just the way that neurotypical people think is different. And so how I sort of learned that was meeting other neurodivergent people who thought like me and could pass pretty well socially, and listening to them and seeing how they operated, how they learned. And so I think potentially some books can be useful there. I've mentioned the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. I don't know if he's neurodivergent, but a lot of the stuff there, I'm like, oh yeah, this is similar and it's helpful. And I've also mentioned Breakdancing Dad's book, and I read, and I'm like, he's obviously neurodivergent, and some things there. Let's see, single sex spaces that I mentioned in my video about gender. So it's been a while since I read the book, so I came away with the impression, I don't remember a lot of the specifics, but one thing I remember is in bonobos, like they're famously supposedly peaceful, but this is because bonobos will sort of try to suppress conflict until it breaks out, and then it's more dramatic. And I will see people sort of meme and stereotype that men will have fights and then make up again, whereas women will have someone who's a best friend and they'll have one fight and not talk again. I haven't seen that with the women I know generally, but I have seen, like, certainly I have had friends, women who were in groups where suddenly the groups turned on a woman who was in the group, or a girl who was in the group, and then expelled her and they never talked to her again, which is very similar to how bonobo societies work. And then with like all male groups, you see a lot more sort of open posturing and like status games and like ribbing, which I tend not to be as fond of. But again, there was like a whole list of these things, and I would have to reread it because I don't remember the specifics at this point, aside from I can think of a couple examples like that. And yeah, writers of memoir and autobiography talk about how they handle situation experiences. Yeah, and that is something that's useful. And I've had at least one video specifically on this, and I've mentioned a few other videos. I think we really culturally underrate the importance of intuition and developing intuition. And so it's like, if you're trying to like look at this and reason out by analogy, you're often going to come to the wrong conclusion. But if you read a lot of examples and see them and learn from them, then you often sort of have a better sense of what works, but it's hard to explain. That's actually something, as I mentioned, I read one Michael Polanyi book and I want to read more. He talks about like the tacit dimension is sort of the similar point, is so much of what we know and operate on, we can never formally articulate. Yes, you are. Julie said you're super cute. It'd be hard to hear. I'm answering questions if you have any questions. And Zuli turns out to be in a bit of a bad mood this morning. I thought it was the ring light, but she's still. So pretty. No, when I was younger, so when I was a kid, like a teenager, I tried to write multiple novels. I never finished them. And then in undergrad, I ended up reading a lot more short stories. And so I tried to publish. I ultimately submitted 4 short stories when I was living in Turkey, so a little after undergrad, and they were all rejected. One of them, I think I might have been able to get it submitted if I sent it to a different market, and I think I just sent it to the wrong market. I sent what I thought was my best story to what I thought was the easiest market, but I realized looking at them more, they also had a specific... This was more of a humorous story, and they liked more serious stories. I might have actually... But the other 3, I definitely think were not in a place that I could get them published in professional market. And then I sort of gave up on that. And then I started trying to write novellas, and then later a novel again. And then I ended up because I was taking it to my science fiction reading group, and as I said, it was sort of an alternate history that was fictional nonfiction. And there was one guy who liked it and compared it to Infinite Jest, and everyone else was... Oh, glad you liked it. Improbable Destinies, which I mentioned, which again I learned from someone who otherwise I don't have a lot of books in common. Anyway, right. So this book that I was trying to write, I'm like, okay, I need to put this on hold, try to find a new audience. And then I was like, it might be better to try to write nonfiction. But then I tried to do. Then I'm like, I don't have my thoughts together enough. And the thing is, like, one thing I learned from my reading and experience is you need to iterate things a lot before you do them well, right? And so to actually write, like, I've been writing fiction since I was a kid, but I haven't necessarily been finishing and editing to publish. And then when it comes to nonfiction, like, writing a good nonfiction book is going to require iterating, figuring out what goes together in a way that people want to read. Like, I can competently, like, convey information, like nonfiction, but actually figuring out what's going to appeal to people, how to organize it, I didn't have that either. And then when I got laid off, I'm like, okay, I want to try to figure out, I want to start some business that's going to let me be self-employed with a decent income and a lot of flexibility. And that's going to be more effort up front. But as a neurodivergent person with a weird resume, it is very hard to get hired. I can keep a job if I get hired, but it's very hard to get hired. And so this is, even though it's going to be more effort, more risk, more frustration up front, hopefully in the long term, it'll set me up better. And I've realized, like, a lot of people I relate to, like, of the people I meet and I relate to most, like, I am the least successful. So there's some space for regression to the mean there, but it also means I have to figure out, okay, what are they doing that I'm not? And one thing I noticed is most of them are self-employed. Okay, let's see other questions. So, oh yeah, would I live abroad again? I've thought about it. I feel like if I want to try to start a business and be self-employed, the US is the best place for it. I also would want to bring at least Zuli with me. And it's not at all clear to me how I document that she was bred in the United States and demonstrate it such that I could bring her back. Plus, I would have to put her through quarantine, moving and then coming back if I came back. So the birds are like an additional obstacle, but I think even without that, I think if you want to try to do self-employment, the US probably is the best place to do that, especially if you are a US citizen. And so I think it's unlikely, but I have thought about, and I had a list of countries that I were on the top of my list, which were Peru, Chile, Uruguay, Panama, Costa Rica, Serbia, Georgia, and then Ukraine. And so you can see with the issue with some of these countries, right? Peru has had another, so in the 90s, early 2000s, they had that outbreak, the Shining Path insurgency. And now they've had another outbreak of political violence after the elections a couple of years ago. And I'm like, okay, once might be a one-off, but 2 suggests it's sort of endemic, and Peru is probably not a great place to live. Chile and Uruguay are still fine, but it seems like for what I want to do, the US is better. Costa Rica and Panama, sort of similar story. And then obviously Ukraine, not a place you want to move right now. Georgia, theoretically fine, but it is, if Russia wants to invade again, it's right there. And then Serbia, I guess, still would be fine, but it's not clear that there is, because the thing about Serbia, nice climate, low cost of living, and in Belgrade, I don't know if any of you know this, there is a major Celtic music scene, and I love Irish music. And actually, I met someone in Houston who is friends with one of the members of the Orthodox Celts, or one of the best known. But I'm like, but also Serbia just not being an EU country. Will I do something for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Maybe. The reason I find 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 funny is the Spaceballs reference. That's like the combination an idiot would have on my luggage, have on his luggage, which I linked that story. And then what drew me to Turkey? So when it's a funny story. So when I was in middle school, I learned about the Kurds in the unit on the Iraq War, and I became kind of obsessed with. There were a number of separatist movements that I became obsessed with and very sympathetic to. One was the Chechens, which, as I've learned more about that, I've been like, I mean, sympathetic, but not nearly as gung-ho as I was. One was the Kurds, who I still support. One was the West Papua situation in Indonesia, which is, that's a conversation, and it's interesting because I meet Indonesians, like very educated liberal Indonesians, who will then say, oh, but like the West Papuans are barbarians and we're bringing them civilization. I'm like, that's what the Dutch said about Indonesia, right? Whereas, anyway, so compare that with Turkey, where I meet well-educated Indonesians talk about West Papua, and they'll be like, oh, but we're bringing them civilization. It's like beneficent colonialism. And then I would talk about the Kurds to educated English-speaking Turks, and they would be like, oh, yeah, we've treated the Kurds horribly and we need to do better. And I realized this is common. Like, you meet English-speaking people in other countries, they tend to be more, sort of share more of the values that as an English-speaking educated Westerner I would have. But at the time, I was like super impressed. So I started looking into Turkey. And I was also interested in like the archaeological history of Turkey, like with the Hittites and the Lydians and people like that. And so I realized, oh, the culture of modern Turkey is interesting. The history of modern Turkey is really interesting. And I had an interest in Balkan history as well. I read, funny story, there's this book on the Balkans by Misha Glenny that I read in 7th or 8th grade, and I was reading it on Memorial Day. And so we were parents, we were like going to different Memorial Day parties, or Labor Day parties, sorry, not Memorial Day, Labor Day parties, right, because it was September. And we were at like 3 different parties, and a couple of them, people were like, are you really reading this? And I'm like, yeah. And the one person said, there is no way you're actually reading that. And I'm like, yeah, I am. And it's funny because even though it was like a 700-page book, like nonfiction history, like that's pretty easy to read. It's very easy for a middle school student with a decent reading level to read that. But anyway, so I was interested in Balkan history, and then I was interested in the Kurds, and then Turkish archaeology. And then when I talked about this with Kurds, and again, there's an interesting, like, the distinction between talking to Turks about Kurds, or English-speaking educated Turks about Kurds, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we didn't treat the Kurds well and we need to do better, versus talking to English-speaking Indonesian about West Papua, and they'd be like, oh yeah, we're bringing them civilization. And so it sort of impressed me, got me interested in Turkish culture, and then that sort of grew from there, and I got interested in the Turkish language, which was an interesting language. Yeah, so that's, and it's one of those things where it sort of spiraled and became a runaway. I became interested in Turkey because I was interested in Turkey, but that's how that interest started. Yeah, this year I have not read nearly as much fiction as I might like to. I mentioned like 2 or 3 months in that I had read, I think, only 2 books that were not either as part of a book club that I was attending or part of a series in a book club I was attending. And I haven't really done better since. I've still mostly been reading nonfiction. And most of the fiction I have been reading has been science fiction fantasy. I think I have still read only 1 work of literary fiction this year. I think maybe 2. I remember, definitely not as much literary fiction as I theoretically would like to be reading, but I just have so many things I want to read, and it's growing exponentially. So when I was a kid, I learned, like, historically, most educated people, at least like in European countries, spoke between 5 and 7 languages fluently. And I'm like, I should be able to do that, right? But I didn't really have the opportunity. So I have stories about how autism was handled, the special education thing, but I was not. Everyone else was allowed to learn a language starting in middle school. I was not allowed to start learning a language until 10th grade. And by that point, I decided to do Spanish because it was the most useful language in terms of like countries I wanted to visit. But of course, the thing is, who is learning Spanish, because we had 6 languages you could learn, which were Spanish, French, Latin, German, Chinese, and Russian. So who, if you're forced to learn a language, who is learning Spanish? The people who don't want to learn a language and are looking for the one that's supposed to be easiest. And normally I would put Zuli back when she gets nippy like this, but depending on if she keeps this up, I might end up doing that. I have to break to do that, sorry. And I'll grab Leela if I do that. But right, anyways, and so who learns Spanish? It's the people who want to learn a language that's supposed to be easy. And then I was in honor Spanish, but who learns honor Spanish? It's the students who want to learn a language that's supposed to be easy, but they have parents who are forcing them to take honors courses. And so I had a Spanish teacher who, like, I wanted to skip a grade because it was so easy, and she was backing that. But the administrator, who had been sort of the bane of my existence over other autism-related things, this one didn't seem to be autism. This was just, as a policy, they didn't want people skipping grades, even with the support of both the teacher you're leaving and the one you're testing into. So I became conversant. As I said, I got better at Spanish in 2 weeks in Mexico than I did 2 years of Spanish. I went to Mexico after having studied Spanish for 2 years, and then went again. But then I didn't really have much of a chance to practice it in Western Massachusetts, and I lost it. And then I became conversant in Turkish, but then I lost that, and I studied other languages. I had wanted to learn Turkish, but none of the 5 colleges have a Turkish course. There are independent studies in Turkish. And so instead, I'm like, okay, well, I'm studying linguistics. I want to study non-Indo-European languages. And I took Arabic and Japanese at the same time, which didn't go as bad as I realize now it might have been, but that could have been partly because the Arabic teacher wasn't really teaching us Arabic. He was using the so-called grammar translation method, which meant, here's several assignments. You do these written assignments. You write them on the board in class. You read what you wrote. That's the class. And so I wasn't really learning Arabic. In Japanese, I liked the class better, but it was at Amherst College. And I could only take, Amherst limits non-Amherst students to 2 classes a semester, and I had 2 I want to take the next semester, Evolution of Human Nature and Psychopharmacology. So I couldn't take Japanese, so I kept with Arabic, even though the teacher was worse, and that was a frustration. And people were like, oh, that's good for going to Turkey. And I'm like, no, it's not, because Turkish and Arabic are completely unrelated. And Turkish, I was actually surprised how many Arabic loanwords there are in Turkish, because I had learned that modern Turkish purged all of the Arabic and Persian loanwords. Purged a lot of them, but there are still actually a number of Arabic loanwords. So some of the Arabic vocabulary was useful, but obviously the grammar, pronunciation, very different. But yeah, so anyway, yeah, so I've never been fluent in another language. I was conversant in Spanish at one point, and I was conversant in Turkish, never at the same time. Okay, sorry, I think I am going to put Zuli back because she is in a bad mood. I will be right back, and I'll see if Leela wants to come. So 1 sec, if I can turn off can I do that? Can I turn off my camera without? No, I cannot, seemingly. Let's see. Because there is no way to turn off camera without. Yeah, so yes, sorry, Zuli. Hopefully she. Sometimes she just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, wrong side of the perch today. Well, as I said, I wasn't really learning Arabic because of the way the professor taught it. The grammar translation method is awful, and I'm amazed that it's an actual method, or I was amazed that it was an actual method that was taught, like it's the dominant way of teaching languages in the Middle East. And then I realized, I don't know if any of you know about the whole language method that has replaced phonics as a way of teaching literacy in the United States. And that has been, despite the evidence at the time that it didn't work, despite the persistent evidence that it has been making our students worse at reading, there's still a wide push to teach it. I'm like, okay, I get it more. This is just a cultural thing. People get wedded to a method. So the grammar translation method is, you have a written passage in the language. You translate it to your native language and possibly translate your native language to the target language. And then you go and you write it on the board and you read it, but there's no conversation, no spontaneous generation. You're just doing translation exercises, writing them, and then reading aloud what you've written. Thank you. She is in a bad mood this morning. She seemed fine like when I was setting up, and now she's like, at first I thought it was, I had the ring light, then I turned that off, but she's still. You're so cute. You're so pretty. Let's see. Yeah, you're so pretty. Super cute. Yeah. What you Scooby doing? Yeah. Little birdie buddy. Pretty parrot. Oh, pretty parrot. Yeah, you're super cute. Pretty parrot. You're so pretty. Yeah. Pretty parrot. Yeah, I love you too. I love you, Zuli bird. Love you so much. Zuli, I got her in 2020, July of 2020, so she is almost 6 years old. I said she's my baby. She's the only bird I've had since I'm a baby. She's a baby. She's also the youngest of my birds. Leela is, I don't know how old she is. I know she's at least 17 because I've had her for about 10 years, and the woman I got her from had her for 5 or 6 years, and she got her from a woman who had her from, I don't know if it was a woman, it's gotten from someone who had her for at least a couple years, but didn't remember how long. And then Zorro he was 4 when I got him in 2021, this is 2026, so he's 9. Well, the guy I got him from told me he was 4, but he lied about a number of things, so I'm not actually sure how old Zorro is. I'm assuming he told me the age correctly, but Zuli I've had since she was a little baby. I do such a little baby. Yeah, you are. You're super cute. I love you, Zuli. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll probably go put Zuli back since she is in a little bit of a cranky mood this morning. You're so cute, yeah. You're so cute. So cute. Yeah, I do. And actually, my original plan after I got laid off was I was going to try to move like around now back to New Hampshire. But I realized if I'm trying to like figure out the self-employment stuff, moving all the way back to like doing all the packing up and moving to New England and sorting all that at the same time would just interrupt and not get the work. So I'm like, I'm going to try to focus on trying to see what progress I can make towards making self-employment work for at least a year. And then my plan is next year, I'm still aiming to, I'm going to move back to New England. I'm probably going to move to New Hampshire for a number of reasons, as opposed to Massachusetts. But my plan is I'm going to move back to New Hampshire in about a year. He is, I think, is that the Melancholy Resistance guy, Laszlo Krasnohorkai? Let me actually look this up. Oh dear. Okay, yeah, that is the Melancholy Resistance guy. Yeah, I attend. There is a reading group I attend sometimes online, and they did that book, and it looked interesting. And then I took one look at his chapter lengths, and I'm going to have a video I'm going to put out on this because I'm less likely to read or get through books if they have longer chapters. Like that seems to be a bigger factor for me than the length of the book is the length of the chapters. Because he wrote, I think it was like 60, all of his chapters like 60 pages. And he didn't really have many section breaks, which I don't like stopping at section breaks opposed to chapters anyways. So I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. And then people in the book club had mixed feelings on the book. So I'm like, was not inclined to pick it up. But yeah, so um, so New Hampshire, lower taxes, less like Massachusetts is sort of notorious for how heavily regulated it is, and all of New England is to some degree. And then also, like I talk about the importance of like community and areas of high civic engagement. And so New Hampshire, Massachusetts, because it's dominated by the Boston area, which is rural, like the politics are sort of dominated by machine politics as opposed to sort of grassroots civic stuff, the way that you have more in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. And then on top of that, so there's the Free State Project, which I think I mentioned. The way that they're just like, we're going to try to just cut the government in New Hampshire leads to backlash. I don't think that's effective, but I think it provides potentially a basis of people to say, okay, well, can we actually like talk to people in the Free State Project, like actually start building these community alternatives and having that nucleus there. So yeah, the lower taxes overall, the less regulation, especially less regulation sort of driven by the urban machine politics logic of Massachusetts. And then my hope is that the existence of the Free State Project there means that I could potentially have an audience for like, hey, this is how you rebuild grassroots institutions. Let's see other questions. So I have not heard of the Catherine Project. For reading together in small groups online. Okay, yeah, no, I'll look into that, but I haven't heard of it. Yeah. New schism in conservative Christian space. I think domestic political coalitions in countries are always changing, and people often don't realize it until afterwards, and especially because electoral politics in like large mass institutions, it's basically, it ends up being, especially with the first past the post system, you have these two-party machines, and then it becomes who can control them. And after I did my video on like ugh is not an argument, I was reminding me I want to read the second half of Francis Fukuyama's like revision of Huntington's thing that's like a 2-book series, right? The Origins of Political Order and Political Decay, which I had not read. So I read that, and one of the things he talks about is this idea of repatrimonialization, where the norm in human like societies is sort of a clientelistic relationship where parties exist to basically give goodies from the central state to the faction who wins. And the idea of having politics that are based on platforms is actually unusual. And one of his points is that we're sort of getting more back to that in the US. So sorry, this is getting off the topic of the question. I don't know what the details of American political coalitions, like electorally, will look like, and I don't really care. I don't think it matters, because I think, unfortunately, either way, we're just going back towards more of a Fukuyama would call like a repatrimonialized model of you have people sort of fighting for control of the parties, and then with the parties for control of the country or the states in order to give resources to their special interest groups. And the best case scenario is you're one of those special interest groups, and you're, basically preying on the state, preying on social trust to enrich yourself. And the worst case scenario is you're a victim of that. And either way, it's like, doesn't seem worth it. Themes or subjects I want to start reading about that I haven't. I think a big thing that I've been wanting to, well, I mentioned I want to read more literary fiction, and I haven't. But then the other thing is I have a large collection of math books, like books on like sort of the history of math concepts that I want to read. But I have been, and that interests me, but it has seemed like less immediately useful to me. And I've had, like, if I had like a whole business and I could have people doing the grunt work, and I was getting my other and arts and crafts channel out, because the big obstacle for that is like the video editing, and like, and that takes like basically like 20 to 40 hours to do one of those videos. So I had someone doing the video, mostly editing. So I had someone to do those videos, and I was doing them more, and I wasn't trying to do it all myself. Another channel I've wanted to do is like a math crafts channel. And in that case, like, these math books would be relevant to that. But right now I'm like, that's not super relevant, sort of high barrier to entry. And then each video would be a lot of effort. And so I haven't like, and like, I'm still interested in these math topics, but they haven't seemed as useful. And so I keep putting them off. So I guess if there's one thing I don't know if it's this year, but one thing that I've been wanting to read that I haven't, it would be these books on the history of math concepts. Because I read a couple after my father died, and then I haven't really read any since. Annotating system. No, and that's actually something I've been thinking about, is I have a video that I want to make, and that's definitely going to not have a bird in it, even if I'm filming with Leela again, because I want to do a red shirt for this one, but on Soviet jokes. And I've been trying to figure out how I want to frame this, and I've done a couple takes that I'm not happy with. Yeah, Matt Parker is great. And he's more physics, but I don't know if you know Steve Mould. He often does sort of mathematical concepts too. And I also discovered another channel recently that I forget the name, but it basically, they find like people arguing about math on Twitter and then explain why people are arguing over this, which is interesting. But right, anyway, so yeah, annotating. So, because Zuli will try to chew through, she wants to chew up my shirt. And so if I don't have the towel, I'm constantly pulling her off my shirt. Whereas now, you can see she's doing it right now. She is chewing on the edge of the towel instead of chewing on my shirt. So, and also in this case, she just nipped my arm, because normally if I wasn't streaming, and if I could figure out, because I can't seem to find a way to like turn the camera off for this. So next time I'm gonna have to probably use some software or something that'll let me control the camera and leave if something like this happens. But normally when she gets nippy like this, I would put her back. But anyways, right, annotating. So I want to do a video on Soviet jokes, and I have been having a hard time figuring out how to do it. Okay, she's getting very antsy. Getting very antsy. So cute, yeah. So yeah, anyway, annotating. So I ended up putting, and I don't even have like the tabs people use, so I cut up Post-it notes for it. Wrath of Math, yes, exactly. That is the channel that I was mentioning, that like looks at these controversies. Thank you. And so I'm like, I'm going through and like, okay, what are the jokes I might want to talk about? But the problem is that there are dozens of them. Nope, no biting. She is very antsy. I do not. Does anyone know? Is there a way to on YouTube Studio turn off video so I can go put Zuli back? Because again, I would have put her away like 20 minutes. Now she is getting to the point that she is biting my ear, which, yeah, if I had a team, I could definitely do. And that's, I mean, right now I don't have much of an income, so if I can, like, business I want to try to start, the publisher, which, as I mentioned, I set myself 2 weeks thinking that would be plenty of time, and then I had like a bunch of stuff I was trying to do, and now I'm trying to build a buffer of videos to get back to that. But anyway, sorry, annotating, right? Soviet jokes. Like, so there's like dozens of them, and I'm like, that would be having colored tabs to like which ones I'm most confident I want to talk about. But that's the first time I've done something like that. And I don't write in books, and I don't take notes. And at least for me, and I'm going to have a video on that. No. Anyway, sorry, get back on topic. Right, so the annotation. So yeah, so I want to do this video on Soviet jokes, and specifically Soviet jokes that are like criticisms of managerialism. And I was using like cut up Post-it notes, so I don't have the tabs. That's the first time I've done something like that. then I realized because they're all the same color, like I don't know which ones I was going to prioritize. And it's also like there's a lot of these jokes that kind of work. And right, and then I was getting into annotation. So I don't really take notes, and I talked about with a friend when I was in elementary school. No, not directly. YouTube is trying to build an audience for business, and then I'm hoping that starting a business, either I'll find a partner in the process of that, like, or I will, again, when I move, I'm planning on moving to New Hampshire, and there's going to be better community things, I'll find someone there. That is the plan. But yeah, so note taking. When I was a kid, the way I would take notes is the teachers would say stuff, and I'd be like, yeah, this all makes sense. This thing doesn't make sense, and I'm noting this. And they would be like, you're taking notes completely wrong. This is how you take notes. And they had a prescriptive, like you write all down. And I never did that, and it was never helpful for me to try to do that. And a friend of mine asked, did they ever check to see if your way let you remember things? And I was like, no, they just said the way you take notes is you do like subject header, like detailed pages and pages of notes. Whereas I would like on an hour like talk take like less than half a page of notes, but I would remember stuff. And so as a result of, and there's a lot of stories I have like this of stuff in the public school system where I had a way of doing things that worked, but it wasn't the way that they were told you're supposed to. And they tried to make me do it in a way that did not work for me, that made things worse. And it trained me out of doing the thing I did that worked. So as a result of that experience, I basically stopped taking notes pretty much entirely. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so sorry about the chaos. If I do this again, first of all, I'll have a thing that'll let me take the video. So I also, if it's in the morning, I will probably, because again, Zuli is usually in a worse mood. She seemed to be in a good mood this morning when I like brought her in. But I was figuring if she was in a bad mood, I'll just turn off the video and I'll go and I'll put her back. And then I learned there's no way built into YouTube to turn off. There's a lot of things that YouTube you would think should be able to do that it turns out doesn't have the functionality to do. And turn off the video on a live stream is apparently one of them. Although, yeah, if I can just get like a thing I slide over my camera that will block the video. How much time do I spend reading every day? That varies. Before I started the channel, I was generally reading like at least an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning and like an hour and a half to 2 hours like in the evening before dark. With the channel, it's actually gotten, I'm frequently doing channel stuff in the morning instead of reading, which is not good, sort of I don't know if you call it an ironic effect, but an unintended consequence of that. So I'll have the video uploaded, but I'm like, the titles and the thumbnails are so hard for me. Like I cannot come up with the thumbnails. I don't want to put the effort in trying to make 3 different thumbnails. And the title, it's like I don't know. And so I end up I'm going to try that and so often I'll be like, I have this video, I don't know, I'll see what I want to do in the morning when it's deadline on. So I frequently, as a result, not reading in the morning anymore. But then I'm also frequently reading after dark, which I generally don't do it except in the winter. So since I've started the channel, probably I'm reading, I estimate 2 to 4 hours most days. Whereas before I started the channel, typically like I would be reading at least 3 or 4 hours a day, and frequently more if it was either like winter, it was after dark, or if I had time and I was reading a bunch in the middle of the day, which and do I lose track of time reading? Actually, no, I don't. At least, except if I'm reading after dark and it's like, especially fiction, then I'll sort of have a sense of it's getting way into the wee hours of the morning and I should go to bed. But even then, I generally have a sense of like, is it closer to like 3 a.m., which is bad, or is it like getting on to 5 a.m., which is like really bad? So I think weirdly, like I have a pretty good internal clock for when I'm reading, but I won't be more than off by like an hour when it's dark. and half an hour in the daytime. Leela, you want to come here? Leela? No. Yeah. Welcome, and thank you. Okay. Okay, well, nice talking to you all. If I do this again, I've learned don't use the built-in software because you can't turn off the video, and don't actually, I have a webcam on a tripod that has a software I can turn it off. So maybe I'll try using that, because then I could. And then also, there goes Leela. Want to come back, Leela? No. And also, again, I guess that's probably the biggest thing. I wonder if there are other streaming things with YouTube that I don't know that I should be aware of. Because when I did the interview with Zarina, like, I didn't have, and I had a ring light, which then I thought that was spooking Zuli now, but it's also, the room's better lit because it's not thunderstorms. Okay, anyway, thank you all for coming, and next time I do this, like, on the learning process, I will be hopefully better prepared. So I'm going to. Oh, the cuts in my videos are that I'm frequently stumbling over myself and repeating myself, and I'm cutting that out most of the time. I will probably, if I come up with a good milestone topic. This was fun, although not so fun when I couldn't put Zuli back while she was getting into it in my ear. Oh, what question? Purple Summer. Let's see. Purple Summer. Let's see. I'm not seeing your question. Can you repeat it? Have I read anything on non-duality? You mean non-dualism? I've read references to it, and my understanding, my impression is that basically it's so there's monism, right, which is that everything is one. And my understanding of non-dualism is that it's not quite monism, but I honestly, I've read references to it, and from the references, I don't really have a good sense of how it differs from monism. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and next time I do this, I will hopefully learn a few things, and it'll go more smoothly. Y'all have a good day, and I'll see you all in the next video, but next time I do a live stream, please see some of you too. Okay. You too. Everybody have a good weekend. Okay.